stakeholder of the town that we are invited to take part to the event. So that is a very local, rooted into the town, rooted into the experience that we are doing as community psychology. And we work very hard to organize this sort of thing. And because it is a form of using community engagement to change perspective, approach, and create projects. So if you still want to be here, go down. The ticket is 25 euros because there is the cost of the bus included. The bus will leave at 7 and the bus will start from there at 11, arriving here at 11:30. If there is nothing to do, we can even go a little bit earlier, but we have the engagement with the bus not later than 11. So if you are interested to come, take the bus here, because by taxi is much more expensive. By buses, there are not buses. So then I give the floor to our panelists and our chair and our invited guests.
Thank you so much, Katerina, and welcome everybody. And I think we should do this several times, but I wanted to make a toast. I watched that video yesterday and learned that Katerina was also an editor on that whole video. And it's kind of a miracle that everything that she's done to herd us cats and organize this conference. So I just wanted to thank her for this session and every other session. And so I'm going to be very brief. We've got some very important guests and we have a video. And I wanted to start and just, I mean, what is peace and what is peace psychologist? And some of us have identified as peace psychologists for a long time here, including my brother Serdar, who we are not always on the same page of everything, but we both care about this issue so deeply. We care about everyone impacted by war. And of all the different harms that all of us study, they're kind of at their most extreme in these places of conflict. The human rights violations that occur are just absolutely endless. And it's a horrific, difficult situation. And we have some guests here with some real lived experience, psychologists from Ukraine. And we all know that Ukraine is not the only war. And I mean, because it's so close to Europe and for a number of other reasons, it gets so much attention. But there are so many conflicts going on. And there's many debates in the world from people from different countries that see different sides of this war. And just personally, as someone who has been a long peace activist and I believe deeply in the power of nonviolent resistance, there are times when self-defense is necessary. And I think I got into this field and the anti-torture field to fight bullies. I never did like bullies, and I think the community psychology needs to stand up to those powers in the world, those powers that create this culture and climate of hate, and we need to engage in resistance. And again, I do believe that if we can act in a preventative way, we can stop war, we can stop genocide. But we've got to pay more attention. We've got to have more awareness and stop these events before they get too extreme, which is, I mean, part of what we do as community psychologists is we stop horrors before they come about. And one thing being at this conference again and again, I just see all the energy. I see the ideas. I see the communication with community members, collecting stories, understanding ideas, trying to solve problems in ways that are transformative. And I just know that there's one vital ingredient to us stopping war and all of the harms that we study. And that's, for our field, which is so unique, is to have a sense of collective efficacy, a sense of hope, the belief, even if whether it comes from a secular atheistic place or whether it comes from a belief in religion, we do have that faith that we have the power to change things. And we have the power to resist peacefully, but we have many, many, many tools at our disposal in the field of community psychology. And it's more needed now than ever. So we'll talk a little bit more and hear from our different panelists and groups in our main keynote here, Serdar. And but we're going to start with a video here that Wolfgang Stark helped put together of Gert Sommer, and just one example of the psychology of how war changes communities and changes people and brings about a sense of dehumanization that is also part of, when we engage in liberation, we are taking on dehumanization. And I don't know, is this just ready to play? Do we have volume?
Well, Gerd, first of all, I'd like to ask you a more individual question. You're well known as one of the founders of community psychology, and you not really combined it to peace psychology, but there was always a connection. So how did it come about? How did it start in your professional career to have the two focuses, the two ideas of community psychology and peace psychology?
Hi, Wolfgang. Nice to meet you again.
Yeah.
After several years.
Right.
I see some very important overlap between community psychology and peace psychology. Both are, in my opinion, very positive approaches. Community psychology, when departing from traditional clinical psychology, and peace psychology, of course, in working how peace can be developed. So the positive approach is one, and the other is the importance of primary prevention. I see in both approaches. Because peace psychology wants to prevent wars. It has other aims too, but that is one of the major topics of peace psychology. First, conflicts between countries are mostly over territory, resources like oil, gas, rare earth, and culture, like language, religion, and so on. These foundations have to be understood if you want to understand a conflict. However, psychology is very important to understand developing conflicts and wars. Political awareness and action are strongly influenced by enemy-friend relationships. It is by the contrasting images that political leaders and the public form of politically relevant events and actors. Distinct enemy images. The other is portrayed as evil or cruel. He is labeled as pig or dog, are important indicators of the possible escalation of a conflict toward a violent outcome. Therefore, they are of great relevance in the analysis of interstate conflicts. Many approaches are relevant, especially politics, international law, peace research, diplomacy. But again, psychology may play a very relevant role. To give an example from Europe, the Baltic states feel threatened by Russia. Russia feels threatened by the USA and NATO. These perceptions of threat, including their historic and present material foundations, have not been assessed and dealt with in a European architecture of security. The negative prejudice becomes more and more important. Whatever the other side does, it is evaluated negatively. To give an example from the Cold War, when one side made a proposal to disarmament, it was easily rejected because the other side is not serious about it, or it has just the aim to disunite us. Last example, double standards. Comparable actions of one's own side and the other enemies are evaluated entirely differently. One's own army is good because it serves defense. The other's army of weaponry, of course, is aggressive and serves its expansionist desires. Opposition members of one's own side are freedom fighters, those of the other side are terrorists. All human rights violations are neglectable, those of the enemy are significant and representative. This narrative is very simple. We are the good guys and the others are the bad guys, all the time and everywhere. The truth, however, is we are applying double standards ever and again. Let me repeat and stress this. Enemy image is one important approach to understand international relations from a psychological standpoint. To understand the functions of enemy image is very important. On the level of the individual, a positive and idealized self-image is produced. If there is a bad enemy, I automatically belong to the good guys. Also, after dehumanizing the enemy, one's own fantasized or actual aggression up to killing can be legitimized. All conflicts and problems of different kinds are squeezed into the enemy-friend thinking. Second, manipulating public opinion, because enemy image imply misinformation, the public opinion is manipulated. Strong image of the enemy helps to increase the importance of the military in a society, and thus preparing and justifying wars. The last function is to stabilize society. Reference to the threat of an enemy distract the public from relevant problems in one's own society. Gordon Allport, the US psychologist, social psychologist, mentioned in the 1950s already the great relevance of contexts. These contexts might be partnerships between communities, professional groups, universities, trade unions, churches, associations, and so on. The contact hypothesis is one of the best studied and evaluated approaches in psychological theory. Pettigrew is a researcher in recent years that worked very much on it. Politicians, representatives of social organizations, scientists, and so on, can stand up for the reduction of enemy image through their behavior or through public statements. Another very important approach that is not very much used till now, it's very bad, it's peace journalism or conflict sensitive journalism. It means to present politically relevant events in the media in such a way that they contribute to de-escalation, e.g. providing comprehensive information, at least not one-sided information, presents the interest and suffering of all conflict parties, taking into the background and history of the conflict and pointing out possibilities for transformation of the conflict. The last one is to make the costs of enemy image, armaments, and wars salient to the decision makers and the public. Clinical and community psychology may work with traumatized persons and communities to reduce their suffering and to prevent further enmity and violence. So there is a lot of approaches to prevent enemy image. The implementation depends on politicians and the public. Deconstructing an enemy image is a duty for every single member of a community. So in general, we can do some of the following aspects. It is very important to get adequate information. In times of crisis and war, this is difficult even in democracies. We all must be aware that leading and high valued media may be part of the enemy producing system. A very important basis is to keep a humanitarian approach. The adversary is a human being as well. Therefore, I strongly support contacts between adversaries on different levels, like open and secret diplomacy among persons, states, and organizations like the UN, contacts between communities, scientists, artists, athletes, universities, and contact between professional groups like community psychologists. Every single day, hundreds of human beings are killed, wounded, and traumatized. The infrastructure of Ukraine is destroyed. There is a relevant danger that this war expands to a war between Russia and NATO, if this is not the case already. And thus, it can develop to a world war with atomic weapons. Russia started the war against Ukraine on February 22 and is responsible for this. The USA and NATO escalated the conflict over Ukraine for many years and are responsible for this. The main conflict is NATO's eastward expansion, which culminated in the Ukraine war. Kennan, a long-term important US political advisor, warned in the New York Times in '97 that it was the, quote, most disastrous mistake in American policy in the post-Cold War era. And almost prophetically, he added, quote, this decision can be expected to inflame nationalist, anti-Western, and militarist tendency in Russian opinion, and force Russian foreign policy in directions that will be decidedly disagreeable to us. He said this 25 years ago. I don't think that there is a point of no return, but we can and must be aware of developing enemy image, we as individuals, groups, and societies.
As an example of community psychology and peace psychology. And I think one of the key things that we do is that we find parts of the structure, the regularities, the political beliefs, and that are invisible, and we try to, as community psychologists, help reveal those to the rest of the world. And I think I met Serdar probably at a Georgia State biennial, I don't know, probably 20 years ago. And Serdar has probably, on listservs that he are on, he's probably shared 200 articles revealing the militaristic nature of our society. And of course, many of them coming from the US, our society is heavily built on not only capitalism, but militarism. And I always appreciate Serdar revealing this world to us. And I'm going to turn it over to him and let him do his thing. Thank you, Serdar.
What I would like to do today is to make yourselves ask a question and ask yourselves, why choose militarism over peace? And I want to do that because psychology has a problem with militarism. But I will start with militarism, and some of my comments will overlap well with what Gerd had to say. First of all, what I would like to say is that I have been studying militarism for almost 2 decades now. And I didn't do it from my choice. It was basically forced upon me. My life has been influenced by militarism, and some of you may already know that I'm actually a political refugee at this point, and it's all has to do with militarism. And just like millions of people around me, I have suffered. But psychologists don't seem to be so very much interested in suffering due to militarism. They are more interested in other ways of suffering, and sometimes not interested at all. When you start talking about militarism, many psychologists don't seem to understand why it is related to psychology, and that I find stunning. So I will talk about militarism bit by bit, and starting with a few simple definitions. I think these 4 definitions would be good enough to begin with. One of them emphasizes the propensity to use military power or threat of it rather than negotiations for political settlements. Another emphasizes a country, a government or regime opting for military methods, forces, and associated, you can say whatever you want, to gain power and achieve its goals. A set of attitudes and social practices which regards war and the preparation for war as a normal and desirable social activity. So if you're coming from United States, for instance, this is what you encounter on a daily basis. An ideology which claims that military is the foundation of a society's security, and thereby its most important aspect. This is what Gerd just pointed to. To understand militarism, we need to understand the key concept, and that is national security. National security is actually based on perceived national insecurity. That is what Gerd was referring to when he said enemy images. There are constant threats, there are constant enemies. But by the end of the Cold War, I used to be in the United States then, it became clear that there was a push from many sources to make people believe that threats were now unpredictable. Now that the Soviet Union and the bloc was gone, that meant the threat was unpredictable. So we had to be ready for everything, they claimed. National security requires special agencies and mechanisms. These special agencies, some of them you may know, some of them you may not know. But these agencies and mechanisms cannot come under public scrutiny because national security requires secrecy. Now, if you believe in democracy, just like I do, then you might ask this question: how is that possible in a democracy? Well, national security justifies everything. Ralph Nader, for instance, someone who used to be the third candidate, undervalued, underappreciated in the United States, has always said that national security can be used to justify any single evil that you want. National security requires being ahead of the enemy, and therefore it necessitates what if they have it first reasoning. This what if they have it first reasoning has been used since the very first atomic bomb. So every single evil idea was justified. What if they, for instance, the Soviet Union, would have it first? And that is a point that you cannot actually answer. There is no way to defeat it. Therefore, the weapon is produced, the idea is implemented, and it continues. So militarism has been almost indefiable and unsatiable for a very long time. National security is an existential matter, and it has to be maintained at all cost. At all cost is the key term here. This is generally known as securitization. I'm not going to go into the definition, but it basically puts everything into this perspective that this has to do with our national security, therefore we have to do it. We have to use an atomic bomb. In my own work, I have provided sufficient evidence, just like others have, that the atomic massacres in Japan in 1945 were completely unnecessary, but it was national security, so they used them. Now, some of you may know that Nazi scientists and Gestapo agents were imported, particularly to the United States, to serve the right cause even before World War II officially ended. In other words, Cold War started before World War II ended. And the idea was, now that we have defeated Nazis, why don't we have these superb scientists and make them work for the right cause, which is to fight communism, to fight the Soviets, to fight the Reds, etc., etc. And if you know about the man on the moon, one of the chief people who was responsible for sending this person on the moon was a Nazi scientist. He almost received a medal from the White House, and someone intervened at the very last moment. The medal was not given. So that was how national security worked. Mass killings, for instance, in Indonesia, about 1 million civilians were killed. Well, what does it have to do with national security of this particular place? Far away from Indonesia, well, it's national security, you don't really understand it, and so on. So following what happened in Indonesia, the idea was imported to Brazil. So if you know about Brazil, you can find the links between the two, and then the following coups in South American countries. National security in Turkey, for instance, there was a National Security Council, is generally used to establish a council of some kind of mechanism to justify everything. So today, security on a single basis, every single day, is used to oppress peoples around the world. So security is a term that means exactly the opposite nowadays. It means constant military spending. Constant military spending is unbelievable. Trump comes and he says, I will introduce this budget, this much more. And Biden comes, Biden appears to be completely different from Trump. But when it comes to increasing the budget, he goes even further. So that's always how it goes. And some people, such as Representative Barbara Lee, wants only 10% of it to go to other needs. But military spending takes all of that away from the people who really need it. So what a waste. Some of you may know the aircraft that flew over Italy because people needed morale. So to make people feel better during COVID, they flew airplanes. They did exactly the same thing in the United States. Every single airplane that flew meant services taken away from people, but it was justified. So they had the 3 colors of the Italian flag. How nice. How nice. But that's actually money taken away from the public. So where does psychology fall with respect to militarism? This is a question that I have been grappling with. And to be very honest, I was trained in a mainstream doctoral program. None of my professors ever questioned militarism the way I do. But I had to go because I live in a world, in a location in the world where I have to question militarism. Most mainstream in psychology do not, because their worlds are not surrounded by militarism. Okay, so let's very quickly look at.
Die Folie.
I wish it was me, but
aber Dolmetschen geht, da gibt es einen Punkt bei Zoom, da steht Dolmetsch und dann übersetzt eine Italienerin, die Englisch redet und dann klingt das Englisch wie Italienisch.
Okay. Anyway, so maybe. Okay. So it's working now. Anyway, so and separately, some psychologists are also employed in the US Coast Guard. They do what they do. In other words, they serve the military. They are also part of the Department of Homeland Security. APA likes publishing these photos. Every time I see them, I am disgusted. This is not a psychologist that I want to see. You may not feel as strongly as I do, but this is how I feel. A psychologist has no role in a uniform. Here is another psychologist, but this time from the Marine Corps. As some of you may know, Marines are made for invading lands. In other words, Marines are part of an imperial force. They're not part of a regular force. They are trained to invade. So if you ever see a Marine, this is someone that you should stay away. A psychologist embedded within a Marine regiment says a psychologist in the Marines need a strong clinical foundation, as well as training or experience in industrial, organizational, or community psychology to facilitate working within a complex system. You may agree with this statement. He is well trained, but the point is he's in the wrong place. Center for Deployment Psychology. Brad and I used to be part of a strong movement that paid a very dear price, or I should say perhaps prices, plural, over the course of perhaps a decade or so for fighting psychologists taking part in torture. And this was the period when American Psychological Association collaborated with the Bush regime or the Bush administration to make interrogations possible, black spots, Guantanamo, and so forth, so on and so forth. The Center for Deployment Psychology was a huge success, and it is featured very prominently in APA publications. You may look, I'm fine. This center has trained over 40,000 providers on topics including military culture and so on. So what we see here is that there is training, there is a huge concerted effort to put psychologists into service. The problem is they are not serving people, they are serving militarism. Here is a commander from the Air Force. He says, our goal is to foster that strong sense of belonging among brothers and sisters in armed services, providing any support and interventions that keep them healthy and in the fight. That's the key word, in the fight. This is what psychologists do, keep them fighting. The word that I would rather put there is to kill. In other words, they fight and they kill. Many publications of this sort came up, particularly during this period of the collusion, because there was a concerted effort to put more and more psychologists into military roles. If you read the preface, you will see, for instance, very familiar names, big names such as Beck, Aaron Beck, endorsing this type of work. And if you look into it, what you will see is that a military clinician should say something like, oh yes, you might have done some killing, but this is real life now. You have come back to the real world. Forget about it. This is the message, for instance, in some of the chapters in this book. So I'll skip to Europe. Europe is not immune to this. On the opposite, psychologists and military forces in Europe have closely working relationships too, but I'm not going to go much into that. But it's not just military psychology. There's a bigger problem that has to do with understanding peace and promoting peace in Europe. Recently, European Federation of Psychological Associations have voted to expel the Russian Psychological Society from this umbrella organization. On June the 1st, 2022, there was a unanimous decision to expel the Russian Psychological Society. Now, is that a move that has anything to do with peace? What do you establish when you expel? The British Psychological Society was also very firm. It said, today we have voted to support the expulsion of Russia from the European Federation of Psychological Associations. Note that it says Russia, not the society. So this is the idea, they're expelling. Brad, I'm going to put another minute just to make, okay. So let's then be a little clear. Just 3 years ago, the European Congress of Psychology, which happens under the wings of the European Federation of Psychological Associations and benefits directly. It's a huge source of revenue for this organization. It was held in Moscow. And the International Scientific Committee had representatives from these countries. And not only these countries in Europe, Asia, China, Indonesia, Japan, Africa, the Americas, Brazil, Canada, USA. All of these people had no problem going to Moscow, which, as far as I remember, was under the dictatorship of Putin at that time. And our colleagues here from Ukraine reminded us that there were problems in Ukraine back then, but psychologists had no problem going. And the presidential addresses were delivered by representatives of the 3 biggest, perhaps, organizations outside of the US. Okay, so all of this shows that there's a problem. If there is a dictator in this particular country, and it can be in Turkey, which is where I'm from. If there is a scientific congress in Turkey, I would expect you to boycott it. So therefore, the same thing was what I did. I boycotted this congress in Moscow. I didn't go. I had no part of it. And some of my colleagues in this room did go. So I would rather invite people to think about the true test, which is the invasion of Iraq in 2003. The European Federation of Psychological Associations did not protest. It was an invasion, but it was an invasion that they didn't have any problems with. Early on, many European countries sent troops. EFPA did not object. Local psychological organizations, national organizations did not object. Later on, 2008, 2011, many other countries sent forces to Iraq. Iraq is next door to Turkey. Therefore, it is a place where I care more about, because every single thing that happens in Iraq influences Turkey, as you might expect. And note that Ukraine also sent troops to support the invasion of Iraq. So almost 20 years later, after the invasion of Iraq, peace lessons are yet to be grasped. This is how it works. Militarism is a status quo, and it is a status quo that is not questioned. If an invasion is unacceptable, as in the case of Ukraine, it should be unacceptable in the case of Iraq or some other African country. I say it this way because this is exactly how it is phrased. Someplace in Africa, who cares? Or someplace in the Pacific where the entire country is taken and turned into a base. Psychologists have to be stopping being Eurocentric, US-centric, and they do need to decolonize their understanding of peace. Take another true test. If you are willing to do this, take the war on Vietnam and take one of your famous, well-known theorists. Take, for instance, Albert Bandura. See what he had to say about Vietnam. Every single theorist that you might take to test will fail this test because they lived in a place which had the origin of the problem. They were not recipients of the problem. If you were a theorist from Vietnam, you would write differently about psychology. So, allora, to conclude, perhaps no better time than this time to think differently. The COVID pandemic has shown the tragic incompetence of military forces across the world. These military forces are made to defend the country, but they were unable to stop even a virus. It has shown that militarism is entirely detrimental to public health. The world has also seen the insanity of invasions, such as the invasion of Afghanistan. Unfortunately, it has now been obscured by the invasion of Ukraine. This is exactly what weapon producers are celebrating, and they are celebrating openly. They have thanked Putin openly for starting a war. I'm finishing. You're not? Okay. So, crossroads of climate change. Let me finish with this. Today, climate change imposes a crossroads on psychologists. Militarism is one of the leading causes of climate change. Psychologists can continue to neglect or worse, serve militarism, or they can focus on peace and demand social and environmental justice. I think psychologists should join forces, but they should join forces with those defending the planet, which is home to all of us. Now, this is a photo taken from a demonstration in the United States. This is what we should be aware of. Every single airplane, every single sortie, etc. That means the destruction of the world. And the destruction of the world is coming soon. In other words, climate collapse is coming soon. Therefore, let's return to one of the founding principles of community psychology, which is primary prevention. It's a key principle in public health, and it's a key principle in community psychology. The psychological literature on climate change is focusing on individual decisions and adaptations at the level of the individual. That is not correct. Therefore, rejecting militarism is necessary for serving public health at a global scale, because it opens up possibilities for peace and justice and directly addresses two issues, namely nuclear annihilation and climate collapse. I argue that we have to challenge the militaristic narrative. The militaristic narrative is everywhere. If you are in the United States, it's everywhere. In the United Kingdom, they are doing their best so that young people would sign up. And they are tricking young people into signing up. So psychologists would play a far better role, a far more meaningful role in any given society if they focus on peace, justice, and human rights, rather than militarism and national security. I tend to finish my talks with this quotation. Some of you might have seen it at least 10 times. Psychology must stop focusing attention on itself, stop worrying about its scientific and social status, and instead propose effective services for the needs of the majority of the population. I use this because I feel very strongly about this statement. Those major theorists who have been extremely successful in propagating their theories and who have been extremely successful as far as their reputations are concerned around the world did not get killed. This person got killed because he was defending the public. He truly believed in serving the public as a psychologist. Those other psychologists did not produce any threat to the status quo, and therefore they were not touched. And I'll leave you with that message. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not so much a public speaker, but I will start probably a bit from my background, so you could have more understanding from which experience I'm talking about. I was born in the western part of Ukraine and grew up in mainly in Zaporizhia, and used to live in Kiev and other parts, in Crimea including. My professional background, education, I studied social psychology, so I'm not like a psychologist, like therapist or something like this. And recent 10 years, I was working with in the NGO field, civic engagement, and we were working with people from including Donetsk and Lugansk areas that are under control of Ukraine, that were started being occupied, that were occupied in 2014, part of those territories. So when people say that the war started, by the way, it was the mistake. The war, full-scale war, started on the 24th of February. And before it started when Crimea was annexed, and it was the invasion into Lugansk and Donetsk areas 8 years ago. I also started peace building, and I have many colleagues that used to work and are still working in Ukraine in the sector like dialogue facilitation, conflict resolution, community building. And we have lots of contacts of leaders and educators, youth workers of youth centers in these areas. So when on the 24th of February, the full-scale war started, of course, I was not in Ukraine. I had my tickets back. I was at the time in Montenegro, and I had my tickets back to Ukraine in the beginning of February, but they were canceled. I changed them for the middle of March, and then when everything started, so I was trying just to help from the distance the way I could, at the informational level, through fundraising, and also psychological support. And I don't have any specific message that I want to convey. Now, I just want to share, probably as a witnesser of how I perceived what was happening and from which stages I went through, and probably where I am now. The first months, I think it was a freezing. It's like mentally and physically, even sometimes I felt I was paralyzed, although we were doing things and trying to help people the way we could, but your mind couldn't believe that it can happen in the 21st century. We were trying to organize also empathy circles online for my colleagues and friends who were hiding in basements and trying to survive under bombing and shelling in different cities. And I realized that we all have different levels of trauma. This is something that we have to remember, because when you are not witnessing this personally, it's very difficult to understand fully what is happening with the person and to support. So later on, we started to do empathy circles for those who are in a bit similar situation that help for Ukraine, for instance, but are out of the country. And then I want to talk about the power of recognition. On the 25th of February, when I was in Montenegro, I saw a message in one eco community group in Montenegro from one Russian who was eco activist that wanted to have a dialogue on the beach, where he invited Ukrainians, Belarusians and Russians to talk openly about what is happening. And only a few Ukrainians came. But this experience gave me this opportunity to be heard. And this is what I heard from many of my colleagues, also from peace building, that understand the importance of dialogue. That the first thing they wanted just to be heard about the reality where you are and what is happening. It's like, because many Russians, they still don't believe that civilians are being killed every day, that children are dying, that women are being raped. They just don't believe. And I still meet people in streets that don't believe this. So when I was heard, and this is the first, is power of recognition, when your reality is recognized, I think it gives me now this openness it's like these three things to be heard when I see that people recognize the Russians, this aggression, it gives me this energy to keep a dialogue. And when we try to organize one online dialogue with both sides, Russians and Ukrainians, I realize it's very difficult to do, because when one party, like my colleagues, are sitting in the basement and they're threatened every moment by bombs that can fall on them, and on the other side online you have people from Moscow or other cities, and they're trying to talk to them, and they're talking about things that it's such an absurdity that how you can have dialogue like this. You need to protect yourself and to survive. And there I want where to come, I want just to the power of protective use of force, because I think it's very difficult to have a dialogue when it's about your life. It's almost impossible. You need to protect yourself. And our community was like of peace builders, the first, because people were in different parts of the country, and many of them were closer to the front lines and in these areas. The first thing that we were told, you should just save your lives, because somebody is coming with a weapon and is killing you, and doesn't care and tells you we are coming to save you. It's not about this. You need just first to survive, and then you can talk and to protect. So that's why we had lots of discussions about this, especially in the international community and from Westerners, that stop bringing a weapon to Ukraine. And I'm asking myself and others, okay, and how you can protect yourself if you are completely vulnerable and helpless and nobody wants to hear you, how you can do this? And if the other party understands on the power, and that's it.
Thank
so,
you. Oh, you're good. Finish up.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, and I want to just 1 second, because it's really difficult. It's very difficult to put many things in a very short period of time. We were also working. I want just to emphasize, and I'm very grateful for the speech of for the first speaker. About that, I believe that if the world had recognized more violence around the world, in many countries, like in the US, maybe as well, maybe then, I'm asking myself, maybe then Russia would not have had those fears and thinking that they can do this government, to invade in such a disastrous way like they did with Ukraine. Because if we start, I believe, recognize violence all over the world, whatever governments did to their own people or to their neighbors or to other countries, I believe that this world would have been another place to be. I also believe that we should work with, not only with trauma, but within some time, we should work with our hatred, feeling of shame and guilt, because all of them, they are destructive. It's natural that they appear, but later on, if we don't heal them, they become destructive for us and for others. And we can see the example, for instance, of Israel and Palestine, Jewish people that suffered so much, but now they do so many disasters and violence towards Palestinians. And I believe that if Ukrainians will not heal themselves, they can put this hatred towards as well somewhere else. I believe also that it seems to me that we are still in the world where we have still countries that understand only, or governments, power. So the language of power, it's not the language of heart. We are still there, unfortunately. And I don't have an answer how to protect yourself if somebody understands only the language of power. I really don't have this answer.
Thank you,
But,
Susanna. That's
yeah.
very powerful. And we really appreciate that. You're very much a community and peace psychologist. So thank you. Oops, this is getting. Yes, thank you, Susanna. And next, we're going to hear from Natalia Trofanova. Natalia?
Hi, dears. I'm very pleased to see so many people in here who are really into peace building. Thank you for coming. And actually, yeah, as well as it was not that planned much that we are here, but I feel that it's like one of aim of my life to spread the peace building and to talk, especially when now I become the one who is so deeply into the context. So I guess maybe I'm more here for kind of to tell testimony from my side, because I'm in the conflict that we have now between Russia and Ukraine. I'm in that conflict within 3 levels, actually. And it's painful, but it's powerful and it is interesting. So the first level I think it's the personal one. I should put the context. I'm half Russian by blood. I have a Russian partner. I have part of my family in Russia, but I'm Ukrainian. I was born there and I feel the connection with the place. And so that personal issues, they evoke a lot of conflict inside of me. I have 2 mother tongues, and that 2 parts of me now in the really strong conflict. So yeah, I'm from Kharkiv, and it's just close to 40 kilometers close to Russia. And when the war starts in 2014, we had really big problems because of that, terrorist attacks, and pro-Russian people really wanted to put the Russian government in our city. So then when it was all gone, the really big flow of people from Donbass region came to us, and so I witnessed them. I used to work with them. I also used to work in Donbass region. So that's my personal stuff. Another level of my involvement is, and I think that's the main one, I'm a peace builder. And what is actually peace building for me? It's about dignity and like the human life, like a main value, to say it briefly. And I really want to be with that, and to somehow to chase it, and not to be away. So I always keeping it in mind, and the continuation of my thoughts and my deeds are really important for me. So it was very difficult to struggle the war escalation start, because I'm the one who is chasing for peace, but violence was against me. And as well, my background as a peace builder is that I'm studying, I guess, around 10 years already, nonviolent communication and practicing as well by Marshall Rosenberg. And I used to study nonviolent direct action and practiced it in my community and within the country. So it's a very different methods, if you know, than we have now. And it was really a big struggle to donate my first donation for the army. I was crying because of that. but what can I do? That's to coming back to Susanna's words, this, what we say in nonviolent communication, this, the direct action, yeah, the protective use of force. So the direct action when you have violence against you, you should do it. You can't put your cheek, the second one, to be beaten. It's not working. It's working, you would be killed. So I don't want to be killed. So I need to take an action. Yeah. And so as well, I'm a part of Civil Service International. Maybe you know, this is a global wide community of peace builders, and I used to do a lot of war camps, trying to spread the idea of that Ukraine has war with Russia for all that years, actually, because it was somehow omitted all the time. There is no war. Yes, like on this global level, wherever I went, I was always speaking about that. And it's very different when you have the active conflict and when you have a conflict in theory. It's very different. That's why I was trying to mix that two dimensions. So, and like the last but not the least level of involvement is for me as a civil activist. I'm for 12 years already, I'm doing civil activism, like on a professional level, let's say so. And I started as a climate activist, environmentalist, but after war starts, I changed directly to the one who is defending rights, working with volunteerism and civil movement development in our country and city in particular. And I should say that me, my colleagues, and all people who were involved in that work, I think that kind of movement helped us a lot now to have, probably you know, so huge power of volunteer work in Ukraine. If not volunteers, we would not fight. We would stand still and do nothing. So I'm really proud, because all that years, like 10 years or something, I was thinking that we are doing nothing. We are running in the water, you know. And then after war starts, it really fast indicated that no, those things that were not just for nothing. Seeds now are growing and becoming really big. So, and one more interesting fact about me is that actually I was not in Ukraine when the escalation started. I was in my holiday trip in Estonia, and I was blocked there, and I'm still there. I became a refugee there. And now I have a very interesting experience of observing how trauma of Baltic states and Estonians in particular are rising, and the hatred towards Russia, hatred appeared more and more. It's not productive as well, but it's very empathic towards Ukraine, you know. And yeah, and what also I wanted to say, we really see a lot in Estonia people who are trying to get away from occupied territories through Russia, and they come into Estonia. And so I had a lot of contacts with them. That's why I discovered there is a really big volunteer movement in Russia, and a really huge chain of people who try to defend the right of person and who want to have peace. And it's really painful that no one knows about it. It's not in the news, it's not the information that should be told. And I want to speak it loud, that it is. And so I really would love to talk with you more if you want. Maybe you have some questions, because through questions and dialogue, we can have some solutions, because we are for solutions here. not only for presentations. So that is, yeah, I invite you. Thanks a lot.
Really appreciate you being here. We know this is, you know, it's hard for us to imagine what you're going through, but it really, we appreciate you sharing this. It's so important. We were gonna, oh yeah, so I'm gonna turn it over to one of our discussants, Rafaela.
I was thinking it will be Augusta, but okay. No, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah, there are so many things that really is difficult to decide from where to start, especially when you are not just commenting or elaborating things that have been in the past or somewhere far from us, but hearing Susanna and Natalia is, I don't know in English the word, but we are in the middle of the pain, in the middle of the trauma, in the middle of, we are not out, we are inside this situation. So to discuss about, but we need to be rational. We need to try to find, let's say, to think, not just to be victim of the trauma that is going on. And me personally, part of that, I am half Russian and half Italian, but later on I will tell you also why I'm always thinking and writing about these things. But I have been working in several situations of conflict in Africa, in Middle East, and in former Yugoslavia. And so I have been approaching this kind of common elements of the conflicts, and especially in conflicts that are affecting relationships that are quite, it's not a conflict between two armies, but it's a conflict that is inside the society between the people, even people that was living beside you in the same building. And it happens, for example, especially in former Yugoslavia, it was really hard. And I have friends that have been separated just living in the same building, and they could not talk each other, and they even start to shoot each other. So there are a lot of cases, unfortunately. History is telling us about this many times. And so I try to find some, to think on if there is any chance to take an inspiration from dramas and from conflicts and from war, because we have to try to find, this is our human dimension that I would like to preserve and to take for the future. At least I will try. I'm trying. And if I think about what is going on in Ukraine and what is going on also in the Russian society, of course, many times I heard about it reminds me what happens in Germany. And Susanna was just mentioning about how many Russians don't believe in the massacres and the horrible things that happens, and the Russian army made in Bucha and in the rest of the places, you know. Actually, I have a journalist, a Russian journalist from Novosibirsk. She's in exile now, but I remember in the beginning, just in the beginning of the war, she told me, I asked her just, I knew that it was just a rhetorical question, but I asked her, why can people refuse the fact that these news from Ukraine are real? And she answered to me in a way that I take in mind continuously. And she told me, because if they, part of the people that is crazy, or just people that are enthusiasts of the world, a part of them, the majority of people, or the normal people, the common people, why they believe in this? And she said, because if they accept to believe that this is these massacres, these things happen, It means that they have to recognize that their children, their son, their husband, their father are monsters. And this is something that humanly is really terrible to believe. And this is why they refuse. But I take this in mind always, and especially during the different months and weeks and days and hours from the Ukraine tragedy. I read many times about the examples of how many decades it was needed for Germany and for Germans to come out from, if they are out, come out from the sense of guilty and sense of what they have been doing in the past as Germany. And of course, it was a lot of decades to start from the what Susanna said, to believe in what it was there, and people refused to believe because a part of Hitler and all of the system, but we are talking about the normal, let's say, common citizen, and these citizens could not believe that there were really the concentration camp and and it happens, of course, everywhere, not only in Germany. Actually, there is also people that still don't believe. Yeah, not only in Germany. Yeah. Also in Italy, we have a lot of people that maybe on Sunday will choose a new prime minister. But a part of this, yeah, because it's true. It's there is still people, and especially in that party, that believes that that is have never been any Holocaust. So it starts from the refuse of truth. It happens with other countries and other examples in the past. So really the starting point maybe is exactly starting from the truth. So recognizement of the truth, recognizement of the responsibilities, of the horrors, of all what have been done. And of course, I have in mind many times also South Africa, because I have been, since I was a teenager, I collected signature for the freedom Nelson Mandela. Yeah, in 1 minute, yeah. And if I think that I was just dreaming and I would never believe that he will be out from jail after 27 years and become president of the Republic, okay. This was simply a utopia that became truth and reality, and I'm very happy. But he didn't do just that beautiful thing in his life, to be free and to be the president of the Republic. But he was involved in with Desmond Tutu, the Archbishop, in building something that was not easy at all, to establish and create the process of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is something that is maybe an example that we can take for the future, because at the moment, of course, I cannot even think about Ukraine in this moment. But for the future, we hope to be here, all of us. And this is the point where we can start from the recognizement of the truth and the brutalities that have been done, and killings, etc. And from that point will be possible to recognize each other, to hear each other, and maybe build up any dialogue in the future. Just a phrase for the end. Susanna was saying one phrase, she said, language of power versus language of heart. And I always have in my mind, sorry if I share a very personal, very private issue, but for me is part of my identity. My mother was Russian. She was living in Finland because she was there since the 30s. My father was Italian, and they met in Warsaw during the Second World War, where there were brigades of young people coming from all over the world, even United States, Canada, whatever. And they came there to help people to rebuild the city of Warsaw. And okay, it's a nice story. I'm very happy. I am daughter of solidarity, whatever. But the nice thing I discovered just in the end of the life of my mom, when she told me that, you know, which was the language we were speaking in order to communicate, because she was Russian, speaking Finnish, and my father Italian. They spoke in German. And my mother know German because she was taught by her grandmother, but my father learned German in a concentration camp. Can you imagine that he will survive the concentration camp? He learned German in concentration camp. And this would be, probably you will say it's not possible that you use this horrible language because it's linked to the horror. But he said to my mom, "Ich liebe dich." He used that language to express his love to my mom. And so there is, I think, even in the worst condition, in the worst picture, in the worst context, there is a chance, and it depends from us to try to do this. So this is what I would like to say, that there are heroes, the real heroes, not the one that has the gun in the hands, but the heroes that are the people that nevertheless there is a conflict, nevertheless there is massacres, etc., etc. They maintain humanity, the dimension of their humanity, and they want to preserve this part and not the worst one, for that, not only for themselves, but for the rest of people. And the future is only in their hands.
Very briefly. So I'm very happy to have here Raffaella, Susanna, and Natalia. Thank you very much for these panels. So another.
We are psychologists trying to find out how, in which way it were possible to find out something to go against power, to against military, to against our country. And we had a witness from the Russian side, and we had also a psychologist from St. Petersburg University who is working in Russia for peace, and she joined us to the conference, even if she was not in this panel. And she will have talk tomorrow, but she is here with us, and we are pleased that she did the effort to be here. And she is also very traumatized about what is happening in Russia, where she is living, even if she is not part of what is happening in her country. And so it is a very difficult dimension to interact, because it's much easier to be enemy and to be on different, we are in different situations, but life is much more complex than we can expect and than we wish. And it is even very, very difficult to cope with all of this. So I was just asked to introduce Natalia with us and give
Thank you to everybody. Welcome in Italy. So I want to report the discussion to community psychology. Myself, as a community psychologist, I worked for many, many years in a war-affected country. I worked in Rwanda just after the genocide, and in the same time in Balkans, there were a war. So 22 years ago, in 31 October 2000, the United Nations Security Council adopted one enthusiastic for us as Women for Peace resolution of women, peace, and security. And this resolution has been very, very useful for me when I worked after continued to work in the Great Lake regions in Africa. That means Republic Democratic of Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, and Central Africa, to put women together to build a peace, to restart with a new government where women will be represented for a peaceful society. I think today has been a very important result to have women talking peace in this Congress. So I think I don't have any more to add at what's happened today, but this is a very successful meeting. Thank you. If you have any questions, we can proceed with the questions.
I think that this is it's the end of a session, but it's a starting point of a dialogue. So because here, unfortunately, in this room, we have at 4 o'clock another session, I will invite those who want to go further with this discussion to go on the third room, where is on the third floor, where is the coffee, and having a coffee, starting to talk together, because this is the room who would allowed us to go on and to see if we are able to go a little bit further than the point that we are here now.